Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today, at this time, I've just finished having a meditation. I guess the specific form of meditation that I do is called Zen Meditation. I learned it, first encountered it in my 20s when I had the good fortune of meeting John Tarrant Roshi. Who is the teacher of the California Diamond Sangha. And the Dharma heir of Robert Aitken Roshi. Or perhaps I should say, a Dharma heir. But I'm not going to talk today about Zen or Roshis or koans or Dharma heirs. I'm laughing for reasons that might be difficult to frame in reasonable language. If I just started screaming like a madman, which is not going to happen, then well, I'm not even going to finish that sentence. So, yesterday, I made a video which might be thought of as a homage to the great questions and a kind of love letter from me to the great questions, but also to all the living beings and all of the beings who have minds or participate in minds. And surely all of the beings participate in minds, because I suspect if we were to suddenly remove even one of the many beings, the rest might go with them and also be removed. It's a beautiful little garden here. There's some borage, some nasturtiums, some chard, cilantro. I don't see the cilantro, but there's some strawberries, some mullein, not all of the names are coming to me. Some rosemary. sunflowers, blackberries, all kinds of things. And yesterday in my video, I presented an idea that might be one of the key toys or elements with the capacity to lead us outside of the common ideas about what things are that we inherit from our cultures throughout our lives, but particularly the inception of this process is in childhood, when we undergo processes that I call enculturation and enlanguaging. And for many of us, it's quite difficult to get outside the human toy box, so that becomes our prison. Throughout our lives, we think we know what things are because we have little tags for them, like wheel, or rod, or key, or lock, or book, or tomato. And at first, the lexicons and their concepts and the linkages between the concepts are an expedient to kind of bootstrap our representational cognition, our minds. But eventually they become a trap. And we become accustomed to their limitations. And so part of the result of that is a kind of terrible boredom, a stultifying inhibition of our passionate curiosity and wonder and awe, a great forgetting of the mystery and beauty and majesty and glory of existence and consciousness and awareness. And this is perhaps the greatest tragedy because it is the origin of all other tragedies. It is the probable origin of terrifying injustice. It is the origin of technology and the origin of the ignorance that drives our cultures to decimate the anciently conserved ecologies and our minds for the sake of little objects and collections of them and crap like this. And this is the result. Eventually, or worse still, some nonsense like this shit. In our minds. And before there can be something like that chain or this barbed wire in the world, the idea of it has to exist in our minds. And that idea has an origin. It comes from somewhere. It comes from something. It comes from imperatives born of the necessity of separating, distinguishing. Notice the English sound in there. That's the same array of phonemes in the word extinguish, right? To snuff out. And so the existence of these machines, including the one on which I'm making this video, is evidence of processes that resemble them in our minds, and most of those processes are lethal in the sense of the origin of the Greek word lethe, to forget, to be dismembered, right? From the great unity, from communion, from the living heartbeat of origin and being in every moment, in every instant, in all relationships. And so the great tragedy of knowledge becomes a library of prison-like constructs when it is not overseen by something more intelligent than abstraction and representation, by something more intimate than maps and explanations, by something more heartful than descriptions, by something alive, and even something beyond alive, by something so profound that no one has ever dared to wrap it in a word, and should they try, it will rip free of those bonds and obliterate them. The essence of being, in which we not merely each participate, but which we each embody directly, at once in union with all other beings, and at the same time so uniquely that it is as if, in a very real way, each one of us is both all the beings that there ever will be and have been, and also the only being that will ever exist. These matters are mysterious and also do not fit well into ordinary language. But they are profound, and they are the fragrance of our birthrights as intelligent animals and human beings and souls and divine beings. So, yesterday, in my homage to the questions, I glossed briefly over one of the most profound of them. I may have made mention of minds. I might even ask what are minds? But I neglected a few other things. And the first of them is a toy I'm very fond of. And I remember that I spoke of a key earlier, and I will return. But to make a bookmark, the key is resemblance, right? The key is when humans make something or think of something, they are representing a meta process or meta thing that doesn't fit in our lexicons and exists in a way that's very difficult to speak about, but we might say is an aspect of the relational nature of the dimension of origin, and particularly things like wheels, or candles, or light bulbs, or keys and locks. In fact, strangely, the shape of automobiles and motorcycles, these things are reflections of meta non-things in the world of origin, but so too are these little pots and that cone. And the humans make representations, but nature makes these and living beings as reflections of the processes and relationships in what we might think of as the dimension of origin. That key is very powerful and leads outside the toy box of human knowledge. directly to those beings and relationships that are here reflected in physical embodiment. And prisons are strangely one of the things. There are no things that are not thus. Or if there are, I would love to discover them or remember them together. There are none that come to mind, let me put it that way. And yesterday, when I was talking about questions, I mostly began the questions with a single word, what? Right? What is life? What is a star? What is the world? What are minds? But it's very interesting to me, and I think also a powerful and useful toy, though I don't wish to get into anything resembling gematria. And by gematria, I don't necessarily mean the magical thing. There's something even deeper than the magical toy, much deeper, and more original and more personal to each one of us than you could possibly imagine. But it's fascinating that in English there are pretty much, and again I'm happy to be corrected here, it seems to me that there are precisely 7 questioning words. And their order isn't necessarily important at the moment, though it might be, depending on our perspective. But they are the words what, when, why, which, who, where, and how. And I call these words the 7 ions of quest. And by ion, I mean a particle that transports things, but I also mean a living I come to life with passionate curiosity and awe and wonder, and the power to pursue otherwise unimaginable insight. And notice that each one of those words begins with W, with the exception of how. And each one of those words, with the exception of how, its second letter is H. Now, I'm not going to lecture on this too much, but when we ask a question, in a way, we double something. What is that something? And this H is like the feeling of the breath, and particularly what might happen were we to make mist, the mist of our living breath on a mirror. Because each of those little droplets of water would reflect both their own origin, me, and also being, and origin itself. But they would also uniquely reflect everything around me and each other, and each other's reflections of me and origin. You see how fascinating this is? This H sound? And of course, we can go on and explore each one. In what, the third letter is A, the first principle. The last letter is T, which represents both a crossing way and also a tree. The tree might be understood as the essential way that knowledge and relationships are structured. All of our languages are tree-like, our lexicons are tree-like, our programming languages make trees. Although even if we have clouds, relationships within the cloud can be structured as ambiently transformable tree-like constellations. What? Where? E is energy, R, it radiates. E-R-E is like the expression of those droplets, the reflections within them, and then the expression of the recursion of their relationships. So each of these words is like a magical key. And it's true that all words are like this, but the 7 ions of quest are unique in this way. I will not explore the anatomy of each of them, primarily because that's just not my purpose today. And I've explored that elsewhere on my website and perhaps in other videos. And those of you who are passionately curious, well, I encourage you to approach me directly if you wish to explore such things together. But there is the little map of one of the ways out of the toy box. Those two concepts, the reflections, right, in form and matter, the physical analogies of metalogs, I will call them. And by metalog, I mean the originary and more essential thing, being, relationship, situation that all living beings are embodied exemplars of. Yes, something like this. It's very challenging to make ordinary language about such things. So, now that I've got all that out of the way for the moment, and I think it was important to trace that route, the question that I dealt with too trivially yesterday, and all of them are profound: light, any question about light; time, any question about time; organisms, the same; stars, nebula, black holes, gravity, gravity, one of the weirder ones, polarities, relationships, all of these things, any of the questions about them are profound. However, again, there's kind of a root core element. Like, you don't get anything without stars, and you don't get minds like ours anyway without stars. There might be other kinds of minds that arise without stars. There's no clear evidence of them locally, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, or it also doesn't mean that our own minds might not be either the results of the existence of non-corporeal minds whose extensions are far beyond any specific physical location, right? Or minds whose extents have locations of forms that we who are physically embodied cannot ordinarily imagine or conceive of. But the question that I sort of overlooked yesterday was, who is asking these questions? What is it that quests? What aches for knowledge of the great mysteries of being? And what is the origin of that passionate urgency hidden in all of us to understand and participate directly, not conceptually, directly in these mysteries together? Why are there minds? And if that which is embodied and that which humans assemble and construct and imagine and produce, if those situations and objects and beings are reflections of meta stuff in the world of origin, what are minds reflections of? Can you imagine something so shockingly beyond our own minds? And they may well, as I said, participate directly in this, or even be the result of its operations, its existence. What is it that is so beyond a mind that the difference between our mind and this thing resembles the difference between a matchstick and a galaxy? For our minds are very limited in their ordinary scope of existence in time and space and relation. So yes, what is asking the questions? And why? And meaning, what are the purposive imperatives that establish and sustain awareness and consciousness as we come to experience it as human beings, evanescently, perhaps quite briefly, before it is deconstructed or damaged or ruined by illness, age, and death. And when it is ruined here by illness, age, and death, does it then dwell somewhere else? But particularly, if all of the things and beings here on earth are reflections of things and beings in meta dimensions, what are our minds reflections of? What is the metalog of our minds? Why are there minds? And of course, this idea of a mind, it's also a concept, it's a word, it's a trap in language. And I haven't really said what I mean by it in this particular communication, so I'm speaking very generally so far, which is always a bit confusing. But when we meditate, if we meditate and we make any progress at all, we begin to discover that there are different aspects of awareness. For example, there's an aspect of my mind that is very engaged right now, who is the thinker, the one who thinks of things. And this one also has an aspect that is the speaker, the one who articulates thoughts. And those two are not the same thing. It is certainly possible to conceive of things which one cannot articulate. It is even possible to have experience of understanding of things that is so powerful and brief that it's impossible to translate it into something that can be articulated before it evaporates, unless one becomes practiced at such things, in which case one develops a kind of memory that resembles the capacity to remember dreams, but it is the capacity to remember insights that are so foreign to our waking mind that ordinarily the waking mind cannot preserve them long enough for them to become clearly conscious or structured well enough to be articulated, either through analogy or metaphor, description or explanation. But I have noticed over the past few days something I've long been aware of conceptually, but uncommonly am I viscerally, more or less like in presence with awareness of it. I've noticed that there's an observer consciousness. And this observer is detached. It doesn't have a finger in the pie, a stake in the game. It simply is. And in a sense, it is the field within which other phenomena arise and depart and become dominant or are inhibited and so on. Much like this living place is the field in which all of these organisms do something similar, right? They arise, they relate with each other, they compete for terrain, they cooperate, they eat each other, they dissolve, they nourish the soil, and so on. So there's an aspect of consciousness, there's this observer aspect. And there are other aspects that are quite shockingly, unexpectedly powerful. And some of these aspects are the reasons that we have the idea of magic, or rituals, or sorcery. For example, there is an aspect that can travel without the body. There is an aspect that can affect subtle things at a distance. There is an aspect that, properly developed, could produce what we might call psychokinesis, the capacity to move a small, usually, object with one's mind, or affect an object with the power of one's consciousness. There are many different aspects of what we think of as our minds, and surely our minds are somehow like an organ of our souls, or our being, our essential being. And even our soul can be understood to have components or elements to it. It's not my agenda to here discuss that. It's a rather esoteric topic, and most of what I know about it conceptually comes from direct experience, but the language has been gleaned from traditional writings and such on these topics. Whereas some of what a goodly portion of what I'm talking about today is from my direct experience, though I've had to learn how I might become capable of articulating such things to other people, granted that others were even interested in them, because in the modern situation, the costumery of our lexicon's words and concepts is vastly more popular than the essential nature or origins of those things. And so most of us, many of us in any case, throughout our lives, we will wear the costumes but understand little of their origins or essences. And it's the essences that I am interested in. The costumes give us clues about the essences if we are seeking them, otherwise they become traps. Or they are trivial. They have no real value. The squirrel is in the sunflower plant. There are other aspects of awareness, such as our threat sentinel, our opportunity sentinel. People who suffer from hypervigilance or who are paranoid or schizophrenic are having difficulties with their threat sentinel. The threat sentinel has become inflamed in some cases, and sometimes attempts to dominate consciousness entirely in the case of paranoid schizophrenia and similar problems. Not dissimilarly, the opportunity sentinel is part of what drives certain forms of addictions, sexual addiction, some aspects of drug addiction, and certainly the addiction to gambling. So there's a lot to learn, but fundamentally, my goal today was just to introduce the question, and I mean for this question to take root in you and to become part of your own interior landscape and motivations. Why are there minds? What is the origin of my own mind? What is it doing? Might it have purposes and relations far beyond those we ordinarily think of? I tell you, they do. Our minds do. And is it an entirely local thing? Or is it a way of being connected to all beings in all of time for a reason so beautiful that to conceive of it would obliterate our human consciousness with ecstasy, with wonder, and with the actual terror of awe? And this, I say, is something like what is more true than our common ideas. So, beyond the questions, the great questions, which are certainly beautiful and worthy and noble to pursue in honest, sincere endeavor, perhaps the greatest question of all is who is asking them and why.